I'm Kelly Duncan, President of the Audubon Commission. This is the second of 3 public meetings that we're hosting. The meetings are to get your feedback relative to the project that's proposed for the Governor Nichols Wharf and the Esplanade Wharf. We very much welcome your input, and you can certainly provide that here tonight. We have a wonderful website. I'm going to let Mark Ripple, who is going to take over this meeting, to tell you more about that website, but it's a very robust one and gives you a great opportunity to provide your input. We do have the opportunity for people to come up and speak. I think we have cards for people to fill out, and when you do, if you would, keep in mind that we'd ask that you limit your comments to 2 minutes so everyone has an opportunity to talk, but to fill out the card and show your name, address, and telephone number about that. These really are important meetings to Audubon. It's really a wonderful opportunity for us to hear from you and to get your ideas about an incredible project. I mean, a really incredibly exciting project for the city, and so we very much welcome your input and anything you may have to offer in that regard. Well, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mark Ripple, who's a principal at SQ Dumas Ripple architecture firm, and who has been very helpful to us in getting this input in a very organized way, and we very much appreciate his great efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. It is great to be here. This is our first community meeting that we're having in 3 different venues, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about the process that we're going through. Before I get started, I want to introduce some of our team members. As you know, projects like this require a team effort, and we've got a number of folks here from both SQ Dumas and Ripple and Manning Architects, our joint venture partner. So we've got Amanda Rivera in the back. Amanda, where did Tom go? Tom is with SQ Dumas Ripple. We've got, where's Ryan? Ryan and Nicholas are from Manning Architects, and we also have Keith Twitchell, Keith in the back. Keith is a facilitator that is helping us with these community meetings, and most notably with outreach. I'll go ahead and grab the microphone, a little bit easier. So this is why we're here. We've got a wonderful opportunity to convert existing wharves at the Governor Nichols Wharf that are no longer controlled by the dock board. They're now controlled by the city of New Orleans. And we have the opportunity to create a vision of what the riverfront can be if we transform these wharves into something else. So what we're looking at is how do we get the best ideas from as broad a base of folks, of citizens, as we possibly can in order to do that. So as Kelly had mentioned, the Audubon Commission has this responsibility to make this happen, and they've selected us as the planning and design team, SQ Dumas Ripple and Manning Architects. We've also pulled in a national landscape architect, Hargraves, that was involved significantly in the Crescent Park work downriver from the Governor Nichols Street Wharf. So why are we here? We pulled a section from the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement. This is an agreement between the City of New Orleans and the Audubon Commission, and I don't need to read it, but it's the quote that's there at the top. And why we're here is to facilitate a robust community engagement process to where we can get good, meaningful input from all of the citizens of New Orleans about what we can do with this wonderful property. And we've added some aspirational goals as well as designers and planners. This is not just any riverfront. This is a riverfront that in one of the most historic sections of any city in the United States. And what we strive for is a way in which we can do it right, do it a riverfront park condition in a way that truly celebrates the heritage of this city. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. And to just generally enhance the public experience of the riverfront. So what does that process look like? The first 4 months where you see community engagement meetings and planning, that's what we're doing now. There are 3 dots next to the number 1 because we're having this meeting number 1 at 3 different venues. We had one earlier in the month on the East Bank. We're having this one as the second one. We're going to have a third one at the fairgrounds in a couple weeks. So we're trying to reach as many different people as possible to come to you to work with your schedules to make that happen. From there, we would be developing schematic plans, that is prescriptive in accordance with the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement. And then after that, there would be a city review process. We haven't fully confirmed exactly what's the nature of that review process, but we know very clearly when we've spoken with the City Council that there will be a review, whatever we come up with as a group, with your input, it goes before the city for a final approval. But we're doing a lot of other things as well. We've already established a website, riverfrontforall.org. If you haven't gone on it, please do so. It's a wonderful website. This is very similar to what we did for the Audubon Park master plan earlier in the year. For that master plan, the website, we gathered literally thousands of comments from citizens, some that made the meetings, but a lot of folks that couldn't make the meetings. And we were able to get some really nice summaries of exactly what the citizens did and did not want at Audubon. So we hope to do the same for this project. It's a proven technique that supplements the information that we get here at the meetings. In addition, we welcome the opportunity to be invited to any neighborhood organization meeting that you would like us to attend. If you'd like us to repeat the presentation or just be there to answer any questions that you have, if you've got a neighborhood organization and you're interested in us coming and you want us to speak, go ahead, please, and invite us. In addition to that, there's a whole slew of regulatory meetings that we're going to talk about, some of which are listed here on the screen. There's a lot of hands in this bucket, if you will, that have a say-so in what can and can't be done for this particular piece of property. And we're doing a traffic survey because anything along that edge of the riverfront, traffic, parking, and noise are the 3 big issues that continue to come up, and traffic and parking are things that we can do a little bit more due diligence in. So after the city review, assuming all of that is reviewed and approved, then we would move forward with design work, the actual drawings and specifications necessary to do whatever has been decided, and then of course another normal construction permit process, and from there then construction. So we're anticipating this process would last until 2022. So the framework for these 4 meetings, again, this is the meeting number 1, second location. It's to frame the issue a little bit, but it's primarily to listen. When I finish my spiel, we're going to have everybody have the opportunity to speak ideas, concerns, whatever, and it's mostly for us just to listen to what your thoughts are, what your concerns are. The meeting number 2 that will happen next month is going to be much more engaging. Based on what we've heard, we're going to be working with a broad group of community input, working hands-on in community sessions with you to figure out specifically what we might be able to do. By meeting number 3, we'll be summarizing those ideas and making specific recommendations and presenting them back to you to make sure that we've got it right. And then meeting number 4, hopefully, is to present the final comment subject to final review by the City of New Orleans. So let's talk about this amazing opportunity that we've got. So, of course, you know the bend in the river. On this side, of course, you know Algiers Point, and across from that, Jackson Square, and this amazing 300-year history that we have that just unfolded across the river from where we are now. For the first 270 years, it was all about commerce. It wasn't until the 1970s that there was an understanding that the river could be more than just commerce, that it could be brought back accessible to the people, to the community. And that was triggered at 2 locations, in the Moonwalk, and I think I've got the approximate dates right, but the Moonwalk in the mid-1970s and at Spanish Plaza. And it was the first time that people, some folks like myself, born and raised here, didn't even realize there was a river behind all those nasty wharves. In the 1990s, the aquarium in the Waldenberg Park, there was a recognition that we can have not just access, but we can have green space directly on the river and capture this amazing, majestic view from right where we live, work, and play. And then just 4 years ago, we finished Crescent Park, which was the first phase of a multi-phased vision plan that was developed in the earlier part of this century. Where we developed a mile, 1.22 miles, 1.25 miles. Thank you, Amanda. 1.44 miles of, Amanda was the project manager for that project. But again, a recognition that not only can we open the river up to the community, but also do something in a way that honors the historic heritage of the city rather than, or the river, rather than just stripping it clean. So the question for us here today is, what does this next opportunity look like? Think about this. For the first time in the 300-year history of this city, you can get on, as some of our staff do, because we work at the foot of Canal Street, you can get on a bicycle all the way downriver, almost to the Industrial Canal, and ride your bike to work, rather than driving, rather than whatever, catching the bus. Or that I was mentioning earlier, my son and I did a thing in New York City where we took the subway over to Brooklyn and walked the Brooklyn Bridge. It was the one thing I wanted to do in New York City, just to see the city from a different venue. Imagine, as a tourist or somebody that lives in the neighborhood, the ability to walk almost, 2.5 miles. It'd be one of the longest riverfront walks, one of 3 or 4 riverfront walks in the entire country that is entirely open to public access. It's an amazing opportunity, and this project is the connection of those two, the upriver and the downriver. So we wanted to frame this very intentionally so you understand exactly what is prescribed. These are the key phrases from the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement that we wanted to highlight for everybody. As we said, this is between the city and the Audubon Commission, and the specific language is develop the property into a public park and recreational facilities. The Audubon Institute is to operate and maintain the park. The Audubon Institute is expected, per the CEA, to do a minimum investment of $15 million, total project cost all in, to do whatever is decided needs to be done. There is a mandatory city review and approval after this community engagement and schematic design process is complete. And the use has to be a permitted use per the City of New Orleans CZO stands for Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance. So what the heck does that mean? The CZO establishes land use for different properties throughout the city. The particular property that that the wharves sit on actually falls across 2 different zoning conditions. The upriver side, which is about 70% of the property, falls under the Vieux Park District zoning requirements. The downriver side, OSR, it stands for Regional Open Space. So it has to meet the prescriptive requirements per the approved CZO. In addition to that, it's important to keep in mind this property adjoins other zoning districts, both in the Vieux and in Marigny-Tremé. So, of course, there are a lot of concerned citizens that do very much want significant input, particularly those that are immediately adjoining the property. And so what are these 2 current zonings? As we said, the VCP district, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, it's the upriver portion, about 70%. And this is the key language. There are only 4 permitted uses: agriculture, parks and playgrounds, pumping station, and utilities. So it's fairly limited in that regard because the specific language is to provide for parks. Distinct and different from that is the Regional Open Space District. It's a little bit, well, it's significantly broader. And it's interesting, the verbiage says large parks that draw visitors from the entire region. This is, again, out of the CZO. And there's a whole slew of permitted uses. I'm not going to read them all. You can probably read them much more quickly than I can say them. But it's a much, much, much broader set of conditions. And for those of y'all that are interested in even in more specificity than that, on the back wall, we've pulled the excerpts from the CZO where you can read specifically how it's phrased. You can read any of the other phraseology if you're interested. And in addition to that, there's a whole slew of authorities having jurisdiction. This is because even though the sheds have been turned over to the city, so they're no longer for that kind of shipping and maritime use, the fact of the matter is this is an operable, navigable waterway, and as such, it's subject to a whole bunch of regulatory authorities, both at the local, regional, and at the federal level. And if we think about this, this is a cross section. So on the left would be the railroad tracks. It's a railroad car and flood wall. There's a section of levee, but the majority of these wharves actually sit on elevated docks, elevated decks, if you will. It's important to understand not only because there's all of these authorities that have a say-so in what can and can't be done, but also from a maintenance standpoint. We're going to talk a little bit about cost, maintenance, what that might look like. There is a cost built in, an expectation that these docks, like the ones that we refurbished in Crescent Park, do need a regular upkeep. So some specifics of the property. It's nearly, I guess that's a third of a mile in length. And there are only, because of the restrictions in crossing railroad tracks, one of the folks that comments from an earlier meeting said, well, why don't you just put more spots where we can get to it? Well, you have two things. You have flood walls and you have limitations on railroad crossings, both of which are very prescriptive. So suffice to say, in this case, we have 4 points of access to the property. You have the upriver access from the Moonwalk, which was the photograph at the beginning of the presentation. The downriver access from the Mandeville shed. We have an overhead Mandeville crossing, both ADA elevator access and steps that get you up and over. And then there's a floodgate and crossing at the foot of Esplanade. So those are the 4 points of access that we have to this property. And as we think about this property, it's important to think about it in terms of what is the nature of the things that are happening on both sides of it. On the upriver end of it, starting with Spanish Plaza, the Aquarium, Woldenberg Park, and Jackson Square, that is obviously active use, particularly given the fact that this is at the foot of Canal Street. There's a great intensity of use that already exists and will continue to exist for many years to come. The downriver side, the Crescent Park side, is much, much more passive, and it's designed, and that was purposeful, intentional. For walking, for a little bit quieter activities, although I did get a comment about one of the activities that happened at the Mandeville shed recently. But the point is that we're in this spectrum between active and passive. And if we were to change this slide, Tom, maybe we'd put a big question mark right there, because the question is, what does this piece want to be, given its neighbor, given the nature of what's happening both upriver and downriver? And we do want to take a few minutes and just talk about the history, because again, for 270 of the 300 years, the river's edge has always been about commerce. It's why the city exists in this unique locale. And it started with simply, gangplanks on a muddy bank. But after a while, obviously, you need utilities, you need dock space, you need wharf space, you need more and more structure. And of course, by this point, there was never any intention of public access to the river. As that continued, of course, with more and more requirements for moving of goods, the railroads came. And then finally the docks, and the docks got bigger, the wharfs, got bigger and bigger and more significant. And thank God in the mid-60s could have been the ultimate nail in the coffin of disconnecting the citizens from their river, would have been the ill-fated Riverfront Expressway. But for 270 years, what we've done, because it was expected, is build more and more obstacles. And again, it wasn't until really the 1970s that it was open, but we like to think that it was the World's Fair. Although at Spanish Plaza and at the Moonwalk you could get to the river, it was really the World's Fair, the first time where people said, God, what is the magic that happens when you allow people to experience this river and experience what makes this city great. And from that point, again, with Waldenberg Park, understanding that it doesn't have to be active, it can be passive kinds of activities, and ultimately with the Crescent Park in 2014. It's a rendering that we had done as part of the study, not just how can the space be used, but actually looking at what is the nature, how does land meet the water, and how can it be done in a way that really celebrates the heritage and allows people full access to the river. And we find, new uses. And again, the strategy was not to strip the site clean. It was to recognize and appreciate this amazing historic heritage that we have. So, an old wharf shed becomes an aerobics spot. I love this image because most people don't appreciate the fact that these turnouts were the old railroad spurs. So the vestiges of what made the city great when all of this was industrial and maritime use get celebrated in a different way. And as we showed, we don't have to tear everything down. That can be part of the story. It's real, it's authentic, and it's part of the history of New Orleans. So why don't we celebrate that as a community? And there are lots of other precedents. As we mentioned, there's maybe 3 or 4 cities in the country that have riverfronts longer than us, and several that have done really nice jobs of celebrating beautiful sort of architectural heritage and created wonderful places, both passive and active. Memphis, Louisville, Pittsburgh did a beautiful job dealing with topography and addressing the water's edge in a much more kind of natural setting. New York is doing different things, Nashville, Memphis, et cetera. And in some cases, this was another concept drawing that we did several years ago. Why can't a wharf shed be used for once a month for an art exhibit? Or in this case, this was a concept plan, or a farmer's market, or just simply a place that our kids can play, either active, whether you call that active or passive, just something that creates another venue for folks. Or just a twilight, watching the movies under the stars. So there are lots of opportunities, we think, that recognize and appreciate the concerns of citizens that live adjacent to the park, but can really celebrate our heritage. Or it can simply be a place where you can sit down in the shade, in a little bit of shade, we'd probably do more than that, sit down in the shade and just enjoy this incredible, amazing venue. So as we said, that just gives you, kind of frames the conversation, but we're mostly here to listen to what you have to say. So the way we are doing this, each person, we've handed out cards. If you need cards, or are we collecting cards? Yeah. So if you need more cards, we've got folks that can hand them out and give them to you. I'll go ahead and collect those, and what we'll do is call people up one at a time as we receive the cards. And you can have 2 minutes to comment. It can be an idea, it can be a concern, or just, it can be anything, whatever you think. So let's do that at the front. All right, so we only have 1 card so far, so please keep those cards and letters coming in. So the first and only card, Kevin Thibodeau. Kevin, come on up.
So does that mean I get 20 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right, well, I'm Kevin Thibodeau, and I've met many of you before, and I'm a board member on Bike Easy, and we are New Orleans' largest bike advocacy organization. And I'm here today to just present some of our requests that we have for the riverfront. I met with Dan, our executive director, this morning for coffee to help solidify some of our positions on this. And kind of the 2, I'd say, biggest concerns that we had that came up were, one is a bike trail connecting the Moonwalk with the Crescent Park. We think that's important. And of course, depends on how much detail you want to go into, but preferably one that's multi-use, wide enough to be multi-use, or segregated, like we have in Audubon Park between pedestrian traffic and bike traffic to minimize collisions. And the other one you kind of addressed, access to the trail itself. Sounds like there's going to be some regulatory hurdles on that because of the public belt. But hopefully getting it where we can get to the trail without having to go on an elevator, maybe more ground level access. That might be a challenge with the railroad there. So those were the two biggest, I'd say, things that we discussed. Other, on our wish list would be bike racks and congregation areas, if there are any, safely lit at night, in hours of operation that would allow, hopefully, workers to use it as a transportation trail to and from work. And that's really it. So one question I have just personally is the public belt and the train tracks, that's here to stay, correct? That's not, okay. That's just my question about that. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next up, James. Come on down, James.
You mentioned various entities that had interest in that cross-section. Have you already had discussions with the SHPO, and if so, what are their concerns specifically with the buildings? And this is kind of tied to it. If they do have concerns, what are your funding sources, and would they trigger a Section 106 review?
Thank you, James. I'm going to put Amanda on the spot since we have a small group and we have to, 'cause in the last meeting we had so many questions, all we could do is take the questions. Amanda was involved, as I mentioned, in Crescent Park, so she was involved also related to SHPO in terms of what can and can't be done as it related to the Mandeville Wharf. So I'm just going to put her on the spot and have her come up and speak to that.
Hi. So for this initial phase of project that we've worked on to date, what we have developed in our studio is exactly what you see here. We have been reaching out to the regulatory agencies, the list that was included in the presentation, and we are primarily introducing the project to them at this point. We obviously don't have any designs to present to them and review with them because none have been developed yet, because we need to get this very important input first. During the work at Crescent Park, we did meet with SHPO. We walked the site with one of their representatives, and they were very interested in what was being done in the shed. They appreciated the fact that some of the shed structures were going to remain. They understood that maybe some of the sheds might be taken down to afford access through an overhead pedestrian crossing to get up and over the flood wall and the rail corridor. They were interested in the finished product of the park being able to tell the story of the wharfs being there. So there were some details that they appreciated as some original skylight forms that were a part of the Mandeville Wharf Shed, that we would maintain some of those to be able to tell that story of natural light being brought in from the roof. That was roughly it. They did also appreciate that we were generally using some old industrial materials of the Corten steel and the galvanized metal, the old Ipe decks that are used, the material that's used throughout the park, as a way to also make a connection between back to the original use of the site.
Yes.
The question was, will a Section 106 be triggered? Is there federal funding, and if you do anything to the historic sheds, of course, that should trigger a 106, but there've been several things that have happened along the riverfront, and somehow the 106, using federal funds, and the 106 has not gotten triggered. So will this trigger a 106? I believe.
Is that the question? Yes, and I don't have a clear answer for you, but we can certainly.
Well, Well, we are continuing to work with SHPO. When I said we've reached out to these certain regulatory agencies just to introduce the project to them, we're also introducing the process. As we work through and develop a design, we are going to be meeting with them multiple times, and so we are going to be looking to SHPO to tell us what they want from us.
Is there federal funds involved?
No, there's no federal.
Okay, and then if there is a 106, when the one for the Crescent Park is done, the proper stakeholders were not particularly notified on that issue, and the process was shortened in many ways.
Can I ask you, just for the purpose of recording it, can you come up and speak directly? Because we don't want to, I don't know how the sound is.
So when, my understanding from SHPO was that when the Section 106 was initiated for the Crescent Park, that it wasn't fully initiated. The proper stakeholders were not all included. In fact, our organization wasn't. We want to make sure that the stakeholders are indeed included as this process moves forward. And while I'm here, can I ask another question? Sandra Stokes. Sandra Stokes, Louisiana Landmark Society. And another question I have is, at the first meeting we had asked for a master plan of the whole plans for the whole riverfront from one end to the other. And there are things happening piecemeal that don't necessarily coordinate. One of the things that happened with the Section 106 for the ferry terminal landing was on the Canal Street landing, was one of the things SHPO wrote in their letter was they approved it all with the idea that if equipment came on the site, do not put it on Spanish Plaza because we don't want to damage Spanish Plaza. Well, fast forward ahead, Spanish Plaza has been jackhammered up purposefully, and this new design has been put down, and it's kind of the same design that was put at the Moonwalk, and it's really not in historic context with the rest of the riverfront. And we're concerned about all these piecemeal parts going in that don't necessarily reflect the heritage of the city. Is there anything you can say to address that?
Thank you, Sandra. I think the easiest thing we can say to address it is that that's why we're here. I know that, Michael, you've got, I don't know if she basically said what you were going to say. But I'm sorry, because you were the next up in terms of the card. Okay. Sandra, the short answer is that's why we're here, is to understand, obviously, we're not involved with Spanish Plaza or the ferry terminal, but for this project, there is that balance between creating a public venue and, as we are sincerely trying to do, honoring the heritage of the city. So working with the SHPO, and certainly we welcome the input of Louisiana Landmarks. You guys have been central to a lot of conversations and a lot of aspects of the historic, saving the historic heritage of the city that we welcome. That's what these meetings are for, is to welcome the opportunity to be able to hear different points of view. Okay, I mean, yeah, right. Well, a lot of this was developed in what year was that, Amanda? 2007, Reinventing the Crescent, which our firm was also involved with, and I think it went through a very robust community engagement process, was an attempt to do just that, is that at the, after Hurricane Katrina, what can we do to re-engage the riverfront? Again, I can't speak to either what's happening at Spanish Plaza or at the ferry terminal, but the goal of the Riverfront project when it was developed in 2007 was to do just what we're doing, which, if you go back to the original drawing that we did, is to have a continuous, unobstructed, continuous public access from essentially from the industrial canal to the foot of Canal Street. And in fact, there were some much more optimistic projections of about what might happen further upriver from that. Of course, that is challenging because the city doesn't have control of those properties as you move up toward the convention center, for instance. But yeah, in general, the idea has been, the idea of linking Canal Street to the industrial canal was established in that planning, in the 2007 planning, and we welcome the opportunity to share that with you. We have plenty of those documents laying around our office. Michael, I think you were up next.
Mark, I have sort of three unrelated comments. First, for what it's worth, I think the Spanish Plaza was developed in 1962. I seem to remember it was done at the same time as the International Trade Mart, not 1976, but only an old-timer could remember that, I suspect. Secondly, you mentioned Audubon. You said Audubon Institute once, and then you said Audubon Commission once. I know there's a cooperative endeavor agreement. I'm not really fond of the Audubon Institute model, where you take public projects and sort of contract them out to a private entity like the Institute, although I know they've had some success. But I guess the question was, is the Institute running things here for the purpose of the planning for this project, or are they involved to the extent where they will end up as the landlord, if you will, of the development that we're contemplating here? And if so, how have we gotten that far, if that's the case? If that's not the case, then maybe you can disabuse me of that notion. And have a related question, but if you could answer that. Well, actually, it's related, but it's different. So. But the question really was, is the Institute running this effort for planning purposes, or has it already been decided that the ultimate development will be somehow run by the Institute? Am I missing something here?
I might need a little help with this.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you want to speak to that?
I'll try. The Audubon Commission was created by an act, state act in 1914. And we, I guess, had Friends of the Zoo originally. That morphed into the Audubon Institute, which is a private group to which the Audubon Commission Cooperative Endeavor Agreement, which has been approved by the city, has the Audubon Institute operate and manage our facilities. But the Audubon Commission itself, as a matter of state law, has the ultimate responsibility for monitoring and has the ultimate authority over these things, if that helps.
Yeah, well, it does, Kelly.
Thanks.
I'm familiar with that. I guess the question, though, was with regard to this development, because you use both terms as though they were interchangeable, and they're really not. Whether it was the Audubon Commission or the Institute that was going to be the developer of whatever might be proposed here for development. Or Ron, if you want to answer, I'm
The Audubon Commission is the CEA, but the Audubon Commission, by virtue of the CEA we have, the Audubon Institute has the right to have the Audubon Institute provide certain services, which would include these services.
But let me get one clarification. Is it for the planning purposes, for this, the endeavor agreement is for planning, or is it for the development? In other words, could the planning process yield a recommendation that there be a more permanent development?
The CEA, as I recall, it provides for planning, design, and operating.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Ron, maybe you can answer this. I think there was a comment made in one of the this project has to pay for itself. And our mutual friend Keith Hardy sent around an email which said something like, why? Why should this project have to pay for itself? I mean, very little else in City Hall pays for itself. So why do we have a different operating paradigm here for this development than we do for everything else, every other public benefit in the city? I guess that was my question, if someone could address that. Thank you.
Okay, any other cards? Okay, and we will have to get back with you on that because I don't have a direct answer for you, but I promise we will deliver one. Yes, please, and just state your name.
My name is Jeff DeLatte. I'm just here as a resident tonight. I'm not representing anybody else besides my family. I'll try to stick with your questions you had up, but what amenities, uses would you prefer in the space? I go back to my notes real quick. I did submit this on the website, but I'm not too sure where that goes from there. But I really enjoyed going to a city this summer in Cincinnati, and you guys had a picture up there of Smale Park. Incredible concept. I love the fact that it's very interactive, and these are all things that I think that would be great to have in the riverfront. But key is having something interactive. They had a huge educational a lot of equipment educating families and children about the hydrology of the river, which I think is a great aspect for New Orleans with the massive Mississippi. And also it's a great teaching moment for the Audubon Institute. How better than to educate our families and our kids and our loved ones than with pieces of equipment that can teach them about waterways and maybe about the city as well. So in that, I encourage everyone to look up that park. It's one of many, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it would translate well into New Orleans. Smale, S-M-A-L-E, Riverfront Park. They had family-size porch swings, a playground with rope bridge, twin slides, fog misters, and rock walls. They also have a carousel for families. I know we have a great one in City Park, but maybe this might be a good place for it too. Garden, tree groves with pathways, and really that's it. So my key takeaways for that are keep it family-oriented, educational, and then interactive. All right, thank you.
Okay. One more. Alan Johnson. Come on up, Alan.
I was just looking for a clarification, and one of the questions that came up when we first started looking with this is in the CEA, it says the city will have approval, and it uses the phrase the city, the city, the city through there, and there's been question about what that meant, who in the city had approval. And in your PowerPoint presentation, it says that safety and permits and the City Planning Commission have jurisdiction over this project. If I remember correctly, your staff was in front of the Governmental Affairs Committee in the City Council chambers, and they said that the City Council would have jurisdiction over that. Have you changed your opinion on that? Does the City Council not have a say-so at this point?
I think the answer is we're still not sure. I was there at the city council meeting, and it was Laurie, I think, was presenting, Laurie Conkerton. Oh, there. And it was the city councilwoman had said that rest assured this process will require our review. And again, it's a pronoun. I don't know if that meant her personal review or whatever. So the short answer at this point, unless there's somebody with the Audubon Institute that can further clarify, is that we're still not sure exactly what the nature of that review is.
If I could say, I was there, and I did hear it, and your staff did say that, and that did come from the table. Yeah, okay, so I just didn't know what happened to change the opinion to where City Council did have jurisdiction and now they don't, and that's what we're trying to understand the process to see who has jurisdiction.
We're still trying to seek clarification as well, and so we'll get back to you
So seek clarification from whom?
from the city.
Who is the city? That's.
Now we're talking in circles now.
I know we're talking. It's who's on first. If somebody from your staff said that, were they mistaken? That they said that the city council had jurisdiction?
I'm not sure. I think it's something we're not able to clarify at this point until we've talked to the city.
Who's the? We're trying to figure out who.
We'll talk to everyone at the city. We'll talk to the mayor's office and the city council.
And when do you know when that will be done?
No. But,
Will you let us know?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further comments? All right, well, I should have fast-forwarded to the end then, rather than the beginning, but I didn't know if that, the key language there is that, it specifically just said the city. We have not clarified from our side exactly what that means. So next steps. This is meeting 1B. See if I can get to the end. This is meeting 1B. We're going to replicate this meeting precisely, same format, same structure, at the fairgrounds, and that is set for October 30th, and I guess we've confirmed that date and time works. Same format, 6 to 7:30 p.m. So give another set of community members the opportunity to weigh in with their comments. As we said then, 3 more meetings in November, December, and January. November will be much more engaging. You sure this guy, he must have something to say about this, doesn't he? Okay, okay. I just thought he was here to make a pitch for more play activities for young children on the river. Point made. So the next meeting, meeting number 2, will be much more interactive, much more engaging, where we'll be breaking into groups and brainstorming in smaller groups about specifically what are the ideas, and we will be drilling down on, so the wharves exist. Do we keep the wharves as we did at Mandeville? Do we take them down entirely? What about the idea of bikes, having a bike venue? What does that mean? What does that look like? So we're going to be creating conditions where we can actively promote ideas and hopefully come to consensus about what the nature of this park is and wants to be. And then in meeting number 3, that would be in December, we would be coming back and reporting back to you, beginning design work that coalesces all of these ideas into a collective vision. And then the 4th meeting would be the final meeting to present our conclusions and then go before city approval, whoever that city approval turns out to be. Before I go, any final comments? Again, this is supposed to be an open process, so we don't need to be so formal. Yeah, Sandra, why don't you come on up, because we want to make sure if you got a comment, it can be heard.
Just will we be emailed the information? I've signed up a couple of times and I never get emails.
Okay, so Sandra's comment is she signed up a couple times, hadn't gotten information back, and you're saying where, KC? So we'll make sure we have, KC is coordinating things on behalf of Audubon. We'll make sure that we get the information to you as quickly as possible. Any final thoughts, ideas? Any comments from Audubon, either the commission or the institute? Kelly?
I want to make sure you all understand we welcome these comments and questions, so please keep them coming. You may think that they're not welcome, but indeed they are. I can tell you as a president of the commission, I can assure you my fellow commission members feel the same way. So please let us know any questions you have, and we'll look into it, I assure you. This is important to us. We're also natives of New Orleans. We also are citizens of this great city, and this is a really, really exciting project, and we want it to be done right. So thank you all again for being here. We welcome your further input and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.